There's a major fight, obviously, brewing on Capitol Hill over the proposed funding bill that addresses the southern border crisis, also provides money for Taiwan, Ukraine, Israel. Arizona Independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema is one of the lead negotiators on this proposal, on this bill. She joins us now. Senator, thanks for the time.
It's great to be back with you, Brett.
What are your thoughts about the prospects of this and why, in your mind, it's important to pass?
Well, first, let me talk about why this is so important. You know, folks across the country know that Arizona is ground zero for the federal government's failure to address this border crisis over the last 4 decades. My state is literally facing an unmitigated crisis. And so the time for talking points is over. The time for action is long past due. And our border proposal actually solves the crisis at the border by both giving the government new tools to actually close the cartel exploitation that's occurring and requiring the government to actually implement these new tools so we can gain control of the border and restore security.
All right, I'm going to read from Title III, Securing America, from the bill itself. I have read this bill, and Senator, have you read the whole thing?
Well, I've got to tell you, Brett, I wrote it. So yes, I have. In fact, I've got it pretty close to memorized. You know, I worked closely with
it's painful to get through.
It was. So Senator Langford and Senator Murphy and I worked together on this legislation for the last 4 months. And as an independent who's neither a Republican nor a Democrat, my office was entrusted in holding the pen, so to speak. But the three of us worked on this as a consensus document. We don't all love everything in the package, but we all agreed to everything in this package.
So, Senator, here's Title III, Securing America. This is about Border Emergency Authority.
Yes.
This is the part that Republicans are really honing in on. The Border Emergency Authority may be exercised if the 7-day average number of cumulative encounters of inadmissible aliens is between 4,000 and 5,000 per day, and must be exercised if the 7-day average is above 5,000 per day. Exercise of the authority is also required if the number of encounters on a single day exceeds 8,500. You know, they point back, Senator, to Jay Johnson, the Homeland Security Secretary under President Obama, who in 2019 said that 1,000 apprehensions was a crisis at that time. We're at 6 times this volume today, but yet Republicans say this section specifically gives a lot of leeway for the Biden administration to not enforce it or not close it.
Well, I think there's some real misunderstanding about this section of the law. The Border Emergency Authority is actually a really critical element. So let me tell you what else the bill does. We dramatically expand detention. Detention beds are when unauthorized immigrants come to the border and say, I claim asylum. Right now, the detention beds are so full that they are released into the interior of the country with a little piece of paper called an NTA, a notice to appear. And maybe that notice is for 7 or 10 years in the future. That's obviously a horrible, horrible outcome. But that is what happens with the majority of illegal entrants right now. So we expand detention beds so that those individuals will go into detention, be processed, and deported right away. Not everyone can go into detention, though. Little kids who are here alone, families, we're not allowed to keep them in detention. And so we create a new system for them where we keep them under supervision. And then we have a very short period of time in which we determine if their asylum claim is valid or not, and then deport them out of the country. But even with those 2 things that we're doing, Brett, expanding detention beds and this new rapid removal authority, there still will be days when too many people come to the border. And so to prevent what's currently occurring, which is mass numbers of people being released into the interior, we created this authority, the Border Emergency Authority, that says, nope, we just shut it down because it's too many people for us to process that quickly and turn away.
Yeah. Well, what about what Speaker Johnson said in that soundbite I led into this interview with, in that there are dozens and dozens of executive orders that the president took in his first day in office that turned things around and created this crisis? And if today he said, let's go back and reverse that again, remain in Mexico, end catch and release, that you could do it without this bill. And, you know, there's some Republicans who say there's more money for Ukraine than there is for border.
So there are a couple problems with that proposal, and I'll just name them out quickly. Number one, we need more detention beds. Right now we only have 34,000 in our country. Our bill authorizes and pays for up to 50,000. We have to have legislation to do that. The government can't do it on its own. Number two, catch and release has existed and did exist under both President Trump and President Obama. Our bill ends catch and release by creating this new authority that requires people to be detained or be under supervision before their case is resolved. The third thing that changes is that we've taken the asylum system and raised the initial bars so that people have to provide real proof when they get to the country's border, and they don't get to just come in like they have in the past. And then finally,
but Senator,
and this
you
is critical.
concede. Okay, go ahead.
The last thing that's critical is this. During COVID, we had a tool called Title 42 that allowed us to shut down the border and turn people away. The courts withdrew our authority to do that. The Border Emergency Authority creates this in statute. We cannot do it administratively. We must change the law to do this.
Got it. But you concede that when the president came out and said, I have done all I can do, that was not true.
Oh, I mean, I disagree with many of the executive actions that this administration has taken. And Brett, you've heard me, in fact, in studio the last time we were together.
On the show, I know.
That's right. It was me and Senator Lankford actually talking about the failure of the Biden administration to handle illegal immigration and our border security appropriately. I do not retract any of that criticism. It still exists today. But that's why our legislation requires the administration to use these tools.
I'm going to play one quick soundbite. This is then Senator Joe Biden talking about a border wall.
You have to have a significant increase in the security at the border, including limited elements where you actually have a fence. Not a fence 3,000 miles like these folks are talking about, but you've got to, there are certain places people can go over and under a fence, but you can't take 100 kilos of cocaine over and under a fence.
He was very adamant when he was running for president. Do you think that your bill creates the mechanism to finish a border wall?
So as you probably recall, Brett, I actually chair the border subcommittee in the Senate, and my ranking Republican is none other than Senator James Lankford. And he and I have been working on border wall issues for 5 years together. This legislation extends the current border security improvement plan, which the Trump administration introduced in August of 2020. Our bill actually says we've got to implement that plan, the plan that President Trump introduced in August of 2020. Our legislation requires that we continue working on that. And it's both repair and building new elements of wall. So that's in the legislation because the reality is, you've seen it yourself, Brett, the cartels are just cutting holes in the border walls in Arizona and just letting thousands of people through down in Lukeville, Arizona. We have to have the ability
and in
to stop that.
California and in other states.
That's
right. We saw video of a lot of them coming across in unfinished portions. Senator Sinema, we appreciate you coming back on Special Report. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Brett.